morning got a lot of attention by me because I'm in a suit, and that I've already heard who died. I heard who's getting married. One person walked by and wanted to know if I was struck by lightning this morning. And just all these people who are commenting about me wearing a suit. I'm basically wearing a suit because it's a Harvest of Talent Sunday, but also I've lost enough weight that these old clothes fit me again. And that just feels awesome. Oh, no, don't you hold that. That's not important today. You know what? It was a miracle day yesterday in so many ways. The Harvest of Talents just had another successful event. The Illini won a football game, so just one miracle after another. I want to talk about the Harvest of Talents. If you're brand new with us today, either on campus or online, this is a ministry that has been important to us, and we're hoping continues to be important to us for a long time. It is a ministry where we bring together items that we have made by our hands or created or painted or baked. All those items are sold in one great big day event. Food, there was a carnival atmosphere here yesterday, a lot of joy. And then every penny that we collect in that ministry goes to feeding hungry people. And that's what I want to share with us today before you hear the total. There's a sports acronym that's used all the time. GOAT, the greatest of all times. Boy, it can cause a lot of arguments among people when they're discussing who is the GOAT in different sports, who's the greatest. In basketball, the debate is Michael Jordan or LeBron James, who's the greatest player of all times. In golf, it's Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods. In baseball, they argue over Babe Ruth or Willie Mays, and I'd get in the argument, it's Cal Ripken. He's the Iron Man. And so all these different debates out there. In football, people argue over, is it Tom Brady or Joe Montana? In tennis, Federer or Williams, which one is the greatest? In football, there we go, Joe Montana or Tom Brady. Now listen, I know that's Tom Brady's old uniform, but Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls. He has 7 Super Bowl rings. Joe Montana only won 4 Super Bowls. He has 4 Super Bowl rings. However, Joe Montana never lost a Super Bowl, and Tom Brady has lost 3 Super Bowls. And so there's this huge argument that can break out. In boxing, there's no argument, though. Muhammad Ali is considered the greatest of all times. And back then, if you'd have just asked him, he would have told you, I am the greatest. And then in hockey, there's also a consensus. It's Wayne Gretzky, the great one. He actually has more awards, more titles than Brady and Michael Jordan put together. And so he's considered maybe the greatest athlete of all times. And there's people who would argue over all of that. Why did I share all of that with you? If you put any of their items that's in their hand in my hand, it doesn't make a big difference. If you put a tennis racket in Ron's hand, at the end of the day, it's still just a tennis racket. But you put that tennis racket into Serena Williams' hands, and it becomes an instrument that can multiply into 39 Grand Slam championships. If Otto holds a football, it's just a football. But you put that football in Tom Brady's hands, and it becomes the instrument for 7 Super Bowl championships, 4 Super Bowl MVPs, 3 NFL Most Valuable Player, 14 Pro Bowls, and 1 supermodel wife. That thing really multiplies. When I hold a basketball, it's just a basketball, but you put it in the hands of LeBron James, and it's 2 NBA championships, 4 league MVPs, and 2 Olympic gold medals. My point is simple. How can it be so drastic between me and these guys? Well, because one is a master in his craft, and the other one is just a spectator. And something amazing happened 2,000 years ago when a small boy comes to Jesus with a lunch that was made for just one person, and he put that lunch into the hands of the master, and Jesus multiplied that little lunch into enough food to feed, the Bible says 5,000 men, but Where there's men, there's wives, and where there's wives, there's children. And so it was well over 10,000 people were fed. How do you explain that in today's terms, these miracle feedings that took place? The Lord often fed people through just the wildest of means. All right, let me go all the way back to the Old Testament. It's a great story. One of the early feedings that we have in the Bible is in the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis. Joseph is captured by his older brothers. He is sold into slavery, and he is carried off to Egypt. When he's in Egypt, he becomes a servant, a butler in a man's house, but he's falsely accused. He's thrown in prison. Now he's been in prison for a couple years. And at that time, Pharaoh in Egypt has the wildest dream. He dreams that there's these 7 fat cows, healthy fat cows on the side of the Nile. And all of a sudden, up out of the Nile come 7 sick, skinny cows. And those 7 sickly cows eat and devour the healthy cows. And then Pharaoh wakes up and he goes, "What was that?" And so he calls his advisors together and he's like, "What could this possibly mean?" None of the advisors can explain the dream. They can't interpret it. And then somebody says, "Hey, you know what? I remember there's this young Hebrew boy in prison and he's gifted. The Spirit of God is definitely on his life. Maybe we should ask him." And Joseph is brought up out of prison. Pharaoh shares his dream, and Joseph, through the power of the Spirit, immediately knows the interpretation. "Oh, Pharaoh, you'll have 7 years of plenty for a while, but then after 7 years of plenty will come 7 years of a severe famine. It'd be so wise of you right now to start collecting food." And Pharaoh is so impressed with the interpretation, he makes Joseph second in command of all of Egypt. He tells him, "You need to start collecting food." Joseph does that, and sure enough, when the 7 years of famine come, there is enough food in Egypt to not only feed the Egyptians, but also to take care of Israel at that time, Jacob's family. In Exodus 16, or in Genesis 47, it says, "When the money of the people of Egypt and Canaan was gone, all came to Joseph and said, 'Give us food.'" If there's anything in you that's tempted to question that story, is that story real or not? First of all, in hieroglyphics, they're never going to make anything in hieroglyphics on an Egyptian wall to make a pharaoh look bad or to make it look like he's not a god like himself. So this story isn't told in hieroglyphics. However, the archaeological finds all over Egypt support this story in a huge way. In every region around Egypt now, these huge grain storage bins have been uncovered, enough to care for that region for many years. And the question has been asked, what was going on in ancient Egypt where they needed to store that much grain? And we know the answer to that because of the Bible. It's one of the wild ways God fed people back then. 400 years later, Israel, they're in bondage to the Egyptian. They're released by miraculous ways. They're now out in the desert. They're in the wilderness. They're hungry. They want water. God provides for them miracle water through rocks. Moses just takes his staff and he hits a rock and water comes flowing out of it. And God starts providing for his people through a miracle bread that fell on the ground every night. Every morning when they'd get up, there was a thing called manna laying all over the ground. It was a miracle little piece of bread that God provided. I wondered early on, how long did something like that go on? And then it was a few years back, I discovered Exodus 16 tells us the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to the land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. For 40 years, God fed his people that way. Pretty strange story. Couple hundred years later, there's the great prophet Elijah. He's out in the wilderness. How is God going to take care of Elijah? It's through another miracle feeding. It's through another strange story. God directs ravens to bring food to Elijah. What kind of food would a scavenger bird bring to the great prophet? A dead animal. Yummy. But it was how God provided. In 1 Kings 17, Elijah, you will drink from the brook, and I have directed ravens to supply you with food there. The whole point here is, I don't want you to miss the point. The point is that through miracle feedings, God can take care of a lot of people. And then you have the story of the little boy's lunch with Jesus. Jesus has compassion on all these people, 10,000 people. Who's going to feed them? And then up comes a small boy with a small gift. John chapter 6. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. Underline the word small. But how far will they go among so many? I love that the disciples are asking, what is such a small gift when compared to such a huge need? There's an equation that's happening here, by the way. This is God's math in all of this. Small gifts, great needs, leads to miraculous feedings. Just small gifts, but great needs, and you add the Lord factor to it, and it multiplies. Which now brings us to what happened here yesterday. Through the wildest of means, God is about to feed hungry people. Through a doily, through a homemade lamp, through a quilt, through a jar of jelly, through a plate of cookies, through an old wagon wheel, and the list goes on and on and on. All these people made and baked and created and painted these things and brought them here. We sold them all, and now that's going to go in some way to help feed this large number of starving people. How can it be done? I want to be clear. I love the ministry of Harvest of Talents, but you didn't give the money and your gifts to the Harvest of Talents. And I love this church, and I love the ministry of this church, but you didn't bring your gifts and your money to this church yesterday. You took all of that and you placed it into the hand of the Lord, and now He's about to pull off some real miracles with all of it. This is the heart behind the Harvest of Talents. It's this burning desire to feed hungry people. You were probably, you might have heard prior to COVID that the number of hungry people, starving people in our world was starting to come down. Statistically, it was starting to drop a little bit. However, the recent inflation has made that thing spike higher now than it's ever been. 7 billion people on this planet, and half of them live on $2 a day. 850 million people are chronically undernourished. 400 million people have no access to safe water. 11 million unnourished children will die this year before their 5th birthday. This is the heart behind the Harvest of Talents, that we bring our small gifts, we give them to the Lord, and then we watch it multiply. It's also the heart behind the ministry of IDES that you're going to be introduced here in a moment. IDES stands for International Disaster Emergency Service. They service people in emergency situations. They do it in 2 ways. One is an emergency service that's boots on the ground, like after the Hurricane Ida hit New Orleans, they were right there. After the flooding in Tennessee, they were right there. They show up tarping roofs. They show up with chainsaws, cutting down trees and cleaning up debris. They show up with setting up shower trailers for the residents and for the volunteers who are working there. They hand out these care kits that have not only toiletries in it, but also other emergency needs and water and dry socks and a Bible. They're there, boots on the ground, and they serve emergencies all over our country and in other countries as well, too. That's one part of their ministry that we want to partner in. But the part that the Harvest of Talents partners in a big way is a year-long feeding program that they have. And they have these year-long feeding programs in Haiti and India and Africa and Kosovo, which is outside of Russia, and Tanzania, and there's multiple places where they feed people all year long. And for a lot of those people, they get 1 meal a day, and that meal has been fed through the IDES ministry. And through what we've been able to do here through the Harvest of Talents. You're sitting there and you're like, Ron, you just gave us these statistics that are so huge. What are all these small gifts compared to such a huge need? In closing, you know what happens in our country. You know there's political gifts and spiritual gifts. Let me tell you about political gifts for a moment. Our country gives billions of dollars every year to underprivileged countries, and it doesn't hardly make a dent in the starvation needs there. But spiritually, we can give a few $1,000s a month to a missionary and send he and her there, boots on the ground, and with just a few $1,000s of support a month, do you know that in a very short time, all of a sudden there's a church, and there's a school, and there's a hospital or a clinic, there's a new well dug, or there's farming techniques taught. How can a missionary get so much out of so little when billions of dollars politically doesn't affect anything? You know the answer to this. It's got to be a God thing. It's got to be one of those wild things that God chooses to do where he takes small gifts and multiplies them and gets out huge ministry. That's the heart behind Ides. That's the heart behind the Harvest of Talents. And that's the heart behind what happened yesterday. On behalf of the elders of this church, on behalf of the staff, on behalf of the Harvest of Talent team, we want to thank you for all that you did. You brought in gifts, and it seemed like a small amount to do. And the real miracle didn't happen yesterday. The real miracle will be what God is about to do with all those funds. Starving people will eat for another day because of what you did. And on behalf of all of us, we just want to say thank you. Give yourself a hand right now.